Hello everyone and welcome to another video on Python programming. In this video, we will be covering the topic of definite iterations using for loops in Python. So starting off, we know that there are two types of iterations in programming, definite and indefinite. We have already covered indefinite iterations in the form of while loops. Definite iterations, on the other hand, are done using the keyword for. And the basic syntax or the standard syntax for a basic for loop in Python is as you can see over here. We have this for keyword, we have some variable, we have the in keyword, and we have this iterable, and we of course define this control structure with the colon, and then indented we have this statement block. So once this for loop has started, we execute all of these statements within the statement block as part of the for loop iteration. So yeah, let's to understand like how for loops work. Exactly. Let's look at the concept or meaning behind what we call iterables and iterators. So think of it in a stepwise manner. All right. So in Python, we have different objects that can be used as iterables, and an iterable is basically some object that it's a collection of other objects. So think of your lists, think of dictionaries and sets. So all of these are essentially collections of objects. So once we have these collection of objects, we can create an iterator out of it. How do we do that? Is we use the iter function. So for example, if I passed this list A through the iter function and I store it in some variable iter underscore A, and I see what is iter underscore A, it is actually a list iterator at some random memory location, which we don't really care about. Similarly, if I gave a tuple, and I did the same thing, I will create a tuple iterator. And in the left, if you can see over here, I've done the exact same functions with sets and dictionaries as well. So I'm creating iterators out of these iterables, so as to speak. Now, what is an iterator? Well, an iterator is an object that yields values successively. So if my list contained 5 values or 5 objects, an iterator of this list will yield these values one after the other. And that is kind of how, or that is the basis for which we create loops. Let's see what we exactly mean using this, using another function that we call the next function. So the next function keeps moving from object to object within an iterator. So since I've created this list iterator, let's just do it once again. So as you can see, I've created this list iterator iter underscore A. Now, with this iter underscore A, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this next function. What next function does is, starting from the leftmost object within this iterator, I will keep yielding or I keep producing the values. So let's just see what happens when I do next for this particular variable. It gives me this object first. Now let's see what happens when I do it again. Now it gives me the object second. What if I did it again? It gives me third. Now, if I kept doing this, it will keep giving me the different objects that were initially stored in A. That is first, and then second, third, fourth, and fifth, one after the other. So let's actually perform that. Now I get fourth, now I get fifth. Now a natural question is, now that I've exhausted all of these values, what will happen if I perform the next function again? Well, let's see what happens. I get an error, and this error is the stop iteration function error, which basically is telling me, look, you have exhausted all of the objects that were initially present in this list A, and you cannot keep doing the next function anymore. You cannot keep going further. So yeah, so this is what the next function does when it comes to the concept of iterators. All right, so now we've learned two things: what is an iterator, and how do we create an iterator out of different collections of objects like a list or a tuple. And we've also learned how to use the next function. Now let's let's come back to our for loop that we started off this video with. So our for loop again, let's consider our for loop over here. As you can see, some for loop with the objects again 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, this is a list. Now I'm going to do for x in A, print x. And let's try to see what happens when we do this. Okay, as you can see, when I have executed this, it gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So first of all, let's look at this for loop. In this for loop, I define a new variable x, and then I say for x in A, print x. And what's happening? Well, in each iteration, I'm printing whatever the value of x is at present. So in the first iteration, it is the first object 1. In the second iteration, it is the second object 2, then 3, 4, 5. And then finally, on its own, like this for loop knows that, okay, now once I have exhausted all of the objects within my iterator, I can stop doing this for loop and I can move on with the rest of the code. All right. So think of it like a 3-step process, a for loop in Python. The first step is it calls an iter function to obtain an iterator for whatever we pass over here, this iterable. Second step, it calls the next function repeatedly in each iteration. All right, to keep getting the next item from the iterator. So it gets 1, then it calls next, then it gets 2, then it calls next, and it gets 3, and then 4, and then 5, and so on. And then finally, the third step is the termination step, is when after we do the final next, where we get this error, as you can see, the stop iteration error or exception. Finally, this tells the for loop function or the for loop that, okay, we have reached the end of our definite iteration or the end of our definite for loop, and this is where we must terminate our loop and then continue with the rest of the code. All right, so this is how a for loop works in Python. Now it's very important to note that whatever we have discussed when it came to while loops, such as nesting of while loops and nesting of other control structures, is also applicable in the case of for loops. So if I had a for loop within another for loop, that is perfectly fine. If I had a while within a for loop, that is perfectly fine. So all of these are valid statement blocks that we can do. And again, for loop is another control structure, and so we must follow the concept of indentation when it comes to writing our statement blocks within a for loop. Okay, so now I'm going to speak about, in specific, I'm going to speak about this something called the range function. That is quite, you could say, it's used, definitely it's used in other areas of programming, but it's widely used in Python. I mean the for loop in Python. What I mean by this is that this range function is very important for the for loop, and we will see why. Okay, so let's look at one of the examples of using the range function. So what does the range function do is, if I give range 5, let's see what it does. It gives me range 0 to 5. What this basically tells me is that this will create an iterator that contains integers from 0 to 5. So it will contain the object 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we can use this as an iterator. So let's look at this. I have range 5. Let's store this in X. Okay. Now let's do a type just to see what happens when we do type X. It should give me the type of range, as you can see. And this is a type of an iterator in Python. Now let's see what happens when I do for I in X print I. Okay, let's see what happens. As you can see, it prints the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. An important caveat when it comes to the range function is when we say range 5, it creates an iterator from 0 to 5, but it contains the objects 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 only. It does not contain the object 5 itself. Okay, this is something that is very important too. So once again, I use this range function to create an iterator of 5 objects from 0 to 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I use that in my for loop, and that is what you are seeing here. Now let's use this range function in the context of something else. For example, let's see. So I had my earlier list A, right? Look at my list A here. So you can see list A contains these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects. Okay. Let's see what length of A is. Length of A is 5. Okay. Let's use the range function on top of the length of this list A. And this is like, I can't show you an example right now without any context, but this form of using a for loop is widely used in Python programming. You will use it so much in data science. You will use so much in machine learning and AI. I cannot tell you. This is a very important, like, sort of for loop expression. So you have for, let's say, I in range len A. Let's see what's going on here. First I do length of A. That gives me 5. Then I do range of 5. That creates an iterator between 0 and 4, right? When you do range 5, it gives you an iterator of 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, as we saw earlier. And this is what we're doing over here. We have created an iterator out of the length of a list. Now when I do print I, it should give me again 1, 2, 3, 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, of course. So as you can see here, it will give me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is a very neat way of using the range function on top of the length of a particular collection of objects. In this case, we're using the list A. This is something that you will use a lot. So I would recommend that you get used to this form of creating a for loop as well, using the range function. Also, of course, there are you can use break and continue statements as you have in the case of while loops. It works exactly the same in the case of for loops, wherein the break statement will abruptly stop the for loop completely and we will move on to the next piece of code, whereas the continue statement will break that particular iteration and then we will resume with the next iteration. So yeah, that was break and continue statements in for loops. Finally, I would like to show you something about how to use dictionaries as an iterator or as an iterable when it comes to for loops. So let's create our dictionary. Let's go. We have a dictionary already here. In fact, let's create this dictionary. Again, we'll store it in A. Okay. So I created this dictionary A. All right. So I have dictionary A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it through the iter function, as you can see. And now I'm going to just, for the sake of showing you, I'll show you that it is actually an iterator of type of a specific dict key iterator type. All right. So now let's do something on this. So as you can see in this dictionary, I have the key first that has the value 1. I have the key second that has the value 2. I have the key third that has the value 3, and then fourth for 4, fifth for 5. Now, a good question would be, when I do iteration or when I do a for loop on top of this A, well, what is it going to pick up? Is it going to pick up first? Is it going to pick up the keys like these? Or is it going to pick up the values? Or is it going to go one by one? Key and then value and then key and the subsequent value. Let's see what actually happens. So let's do for I in iter underscore A print I. Let's see what is the iterations happening upon using this. So as you can see, we're using the keys. So by default, when we do this, when we create an iterator out of a dictionary, we use only the keys as our iterator elements or iterator values. But of course, like if you wanted to use values, all you would have to do is pass a dot values over here. And if you remember from a dictionary video, this a dot values gives us a list of, or it gives us essentially a list of the values in our dictionary. So when we pass this to the iterator, iter function, and we create an iterator out of it, let's see what happens over here. Now let's see what is iter underscore A. You can actually see it's now the dict value iterator at a particular memory location. So it's not the dict key as we saw earlier, it's a dict value iterator. So now that we have this dictionary value iterator, now let's print what are our iterator elements. And as you can see, now we are printing values and not the keys. So this is how to, this is basically two different ways of iterating through a dictionary, one through keys and one through values. So this concludes it for our video on definite iterations in Python. I hope in this video you understood and you learned about the concept of iterables and iterators and the different functions associated with it and how exactly the for loop function works in Python. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video, you learned from this video, and please do give us a like, subscribe to our channel. This helps us reach new learners such as yourself. And once again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.